Tim Berners-Lee brought hypertext to the internet by creating the first website in December of 1990, no one knew for sure what would happen. But just 30 years later, we use the World Wide Web for nearly everything, from shopping to watching movies to communicating with friends and family. Because of the rapid rise, the need for speed and access to these networks has outpaced the ability to put up the actual cables. The question is it time for an upgrade? Joining us today is Kurt Fox of Crown Castle and Dale Bruckhart of Digital Back Office to talk about the next steps in the evolution of the web. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor, Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders.
Good morning.
Good to have you here. So, for our viewers and listeners at home, Dale of Digital Back Office is familiar at this point as one of our go-to tech experts. Tell us a little bit about Crown Castle Fiber, what it is, what you do there.
I am the regional sales director for Crown Castle Fiber for the greater Northeast, specifically Connecticut area. Mm-hmm. And Crown Castle is an open access telecommunications company. Provide dark fiber and Ethernet services throughout, just like a LEC or a cable company.
You know, stuff's moving much, much faster these days than it used to. What exactly is fiber, and how is it different than dial-up, DSL, or even cable from the cable company?
The cable that's on the pole is a connection that is usually higher bandwidth than your old T1s and DSL lines. Usually our solution is dedicated as opposed to, this is on the internet side of things, so that the bandwidth is the same up and download speed. And we do not oversubscribe, or it's a minimal amount as opposed to a normal cable company where when the kids come home, all of a sudden your cable is degraded.
And Dale, how does what Curtis does, how does that speed translate into what you guys do? How important is that?
Well, we're a retail, if you will, provider of the cable, the fiber internet services. Crown Castle has an extensive amount of fiber installed across the state of Connecticut, which Kurt will talk about. What Digital Back Office does is to buy those fiber circuits from Crown Castle, and then we, what I refer to as a dime, we design, we integrate, we provide maintenance and execution to build out fiber networks for our customers, whether they be municipalities or school districts or even private industry.
Excellent. So there's a lot of opportunities for you guys to kind of work together on those things.
Absolutely. We work very closely with Kurt.
So other than obviously the higher speeds, what are some other benefits to fiber? Is there more to it than just speed, or is it just fast?
In terms of the fiber itself, in terms of when somebody's using it, it's faster and it's really unlimited unmetered bandwidth. So that on a dark piece, Dale's organization will put boxes at the end to give you typically much higher bandwidth than used to be. We started with DBO, now Advanced Corporate Networking, back in 2003, 2004. And at the time, with a lot of the school districts, they were using T1s. And then, since then, a lot of the school districts are up to 1 gig and 10 gig speeds, typically at around the same price points that they were paying for T1s a long time ago.
So it hasn't gotten vastly more expensive, it's just gotten faster.
Yes.
Much faster. Yeah, I would add to that, Kurt. We have Stanford Public Schools is a good example. We started with them over 20 years ago with the T1 circuits that Kurt was talking about, which were 1.5 meg. We upgraded them to fiber over 15 years ago, and they were at 1 gig. Then we upgraded them to 10 gig. And just this year, we upgraded the core ring that they have in place to connect their schools together to 40 gig. without replacing the fiber. So the bandwidth.
Just for the not tech people at home, we went from T1 to a 48. How many times is that? 40 times faster? Like what sort of order of increase is this?
Now you're testing me here, Matt. And it's much more than 40 times faster.
It's just exponentially a large amount of information going at once.
Yes, well, so from 1.5 meg to 100 megs, it's 60 times faster.
Okay.
So it's 600 to 6,000 times faster.
6,000 times faster in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
I mean, I remember the dial-up and, waiting for things, but we don't realize just how much it's, more is coming through at all times on these.
I not only remember the dial-up, Matt, I remember the acoustic coupler.
Wow.
And just to put it in perspective, it's like everybody using a cell phone. You can only be, in the old days, can just get, a phone call through. And now you're watching, movies and whatever else.
Streaming video, yeah. So as the speeds have gone up, our use of that has also correspondingly gone up. We're just putting more and more information through all the time.
Yes.
So obviously, you are part of this putting up the fiber lines. What is the current kind of footprint look like in Connecticut?
So in Connecticut, I started in 2003, and we had a little network as FiberTech before we came Crown Castle. A little network in Hartford, a little network in New Haven, and we connected the two. And since then, we have approximately 6,000 miles in Connecticut. We're the only utility that actually has an infrastructure in all 169 districts in Connecticut. From Greenwich to Canaan to Stonington and to Putnam.
All 169 municipalities. And how long did it kind of take? Can you give us a short history of kind of the growth of that footprint? Like you said, it was New Haven, Hartford, and it kind of went from there?
Yes. One of the driving forces with it was the Connecticut Education Network, which allowed us to get to some of the core towns in, the I-91, I-95 corridor. So we did that through 2002 to 2009 or 10. Then there was the Connecticut Public Safety Network, which between 2009 and 2012, there was the Obama stimulus package that allows us to extend both the CEN network as well as the public safety network all the way to the 169. And then in between all that, we were slowly building out municipal networks in conjunction with advanced corporate networking and ourselves, so that we got thicker in some of the towns, like a Stamford. Norwalk is another example.
So the education, the local government, that's all been a part of what you do kind of for a long time now. It's not just something you've been doing more recently. It's kind of a core of what you guys do. Right.
And in addition to that, we did a lot of stuff with the tower, so the cell tower. So we extend that for the carriers as well. So those are the big three biggest drivers of expanding out the network.
There's some terminology that kind of goes along with all of this that viewers at home might not be familiar with. So what does it mean to be an open access provider? Is there such a thing as a closed access provider?
The closed access providers would be typically the LEC, in Connecticut, be Frontier or the cable companies, who are using their network to deliver services for their own. Crown Castle Fiber delivers an open access network, which means that I'm not only delivering services, I provide the ability for others, like advanced corporate networking, to use fibers on our network to deliver services.
So that's where Dale would come in.
Yes. There's some fiber to the home providers that would also use us here in Connecticut, so that we're the middle mile, and then they can deliver last mile services. But they still have to get back to a POP internet access point. So they have to go from, for the sake of argument, Bridgeport back to New Haven. So they have to traverse multiple municipalities to get there.
I believe it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Kurt, some of the larger companies, AT&T, Verizon, if they need access here in Connecticut to provide services, would they buy fiber from you as well?
Yes. So on the tower business, they were doing that. So that in order to connect the towers together, they're using us to deliver. So they're leasing fibers from us to get from tower to tower. The new business is small cells, so that where the big towers provide coverage, small cells provide capacity, 5G, Internet of Things. So you need to put more connectivity closer to the neighborhoods, which is on the telephone poles and such. And again, those carriers can use us to connect the small cells together.
So it's not just some of the smaller companies like Dale's working for, but the big boys are also working with you to get access to these networks.
Yes, and then on top of that, we have direct relationships with either towns, enterprise customers, hospitals, things along those lines.
Yeah.
So
you were talking about small cell. Can you go a little bit more into that? What is that exactly? These are not the big towers. These are more local. What's the deal with those?
Yeah, they're could be like 2 feet by 4 feet. If you look at like a little smaller than that little power thing you see on some of the telephone poles for the utilities. So a carrier like a Verizon, you want to deploy this small cell environment, which are like little pods on every third telephone pole, which helps with the capacity piece, and they've got to be close to one another. Crown Castle, the other portion of Crown Castle, actually delivers the same thing on the small cells as we do with the towers. We're a real estate investment trust, so we lease space on the towers. We can also lease space on these small cells as well to the carriers.
Okay. Interesting.
Or we can just deliver them fiber, and they can have their own small cells.
So there's a lot of different options that you can offer to.
Yes.
Towns across the state are, either have fiber already or thinking about putting it together, as part of the plans. And it really seems to be like where the internet is going. Do you have examples of towns that have gone through this process and have had good success with it?
We have several. Let me jump on that one, Kurt.
Yeah, go through it.
We, as I said, Stanford was one of our first customers, but probably the largest and earliest customer was the city of Norwalk, which has been on this program before, and they formed a townwide or a citywide committee 15 years ago to evaluate their IT needs, which I thought was pretty smart of them at the time. It included the Board of Ed, police, fire services, all city agencies, and the first priority that they decided on was to put in a high-speed wide area network, which at the time they called it MAN, an M-A-N, a metropolitan area network.
Okay.
And they were also very wise to ask for a highly redundant network. So we designed what is called ring topologies. It's much more resilient. If you have a fiber break at any point, it's not going to take down the whole network. And that network has performed now for going on almost 18 years with almost no outages other than loss of local power. We're seeing other communities doing something similar. Middletown has also invested in their infrastructure. And that's the other thing we're seeing with the fiber that's available from Crown Castle. Because the internet and because the applications running on the internet have become so critical, people are really starting to think about a lot of redundancy, not only in their connectivity between buildings, but in their internet service providers as well. And it's just an indication of how important and critical, because it's not just, when we started with schools, I would ask people in schools, is it okay if the internet is down for 10 or 15 minutes or 30 minutes? And yeah, no problem. But today, if that internet is down for seconds,
crisis.
You start getting phone calls. And then you have to look at the applications too. Now you have a lot of emergency services, police and fire services on public safety data network. You have voice over IP running on these networks. So they have become increasingly critical, and it's important that communities invest in them.
Yeah. So you talked about some of the redundancy. That's where, you know, one part of it could go down, but the rest of it will continue to function, and you have kind of layers of that. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, not only layers of physical fiber, but then you also start getting into the electronics and the various protocols that are used with the electronics to provide the failover capability. If somebody goes out and runs into a telephone pole with their car and takes out the fiber hanging on that pole, then the electronics that connects the fiber needs to have a mechanism where it's going to say, oh, I need to choose a different route now to connect to the internet and go out a different path. So that's all done. That's part of the design service that we provide. And of course, redundancy of fiber is critical too, because if all those services from the internet service providers are hanging on the same pole, they may all be taken out if that pole goes down. So that's where Kurt comes in to provide alternate paths for the fiber as well.
So the electronics part that you were saying, would that come from you guys and then the fiber would come from Kurt, or would Kurt provide the box and you would work with them on it?
Yes, there is electronics. There are electronics that's provided by Crown Castle, but for the integration with the customer networks, we provide the electronics to provide that integration, and oftentimes the routing that's necessary for connectivity between multiple buildings in a city, multiple schools in a school district, and then ultimately connectivity with the, at least with the schools with CEN or with the towns with the PSDN.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the municipal area network kind of idea, and we know some towns have started to build these smaller networks, say from the high school to the public works building, so on and so forth. How difficult is it to build out those systems to start including, say, local businesses and homes?
Oh no, I'll take that one. So over the 15, 18 years that we've been working together, we've slowly built out a lot of the education network in the towns. The top 20 towns in cities in Connecticut, I believe our infrastructure is in probably 16 or 17 where we're the primary provider. You know, either directly or in the case with Stanford, Norwalk with advanced corporate networking. If I'm connecting the actual city facilities together, I can leverage the fact that I've already built out to the education network and or the area hospitals or for whatever. So I've got a fairly good footprint in especially the I-91-95 corridor, and because of the CEN and public safety, even out in the Putnams of the world, where, for example, you know, a hospital system out there has, you know, 12 facilities, so I can be closer to other components, you know, municipal offices and things along those lines. If it's fiber to the home, we don't do that. We're the middle mile for another provider that can jump off where we are, and because they're jumping off closer to a neighborhood, it allows them to be a lot more competitive than if they had to build 5 miles to get to that neighborhood. So some of our partners in that regard, you know, have leveraged us, you know, because, like, for example, in the case of New Haven, where we're already in all the schools, that means I'm pretty close to most of the neighborhoods.
And so, you know, we're providing access and information to these people. Are there economic benefits to doing this for towns?
Yeah, the typical conversation I've had over the years was it's a business development play as well. So, for example, if you're using somebody like ourselves and we're building out that fiber infrastructure could be used for business parks that can not only need to get, you know, connectivity, you know, to the internet, but also may need to get to a data center someplace else, you know, in New Jersey or whatever else. And so they have to, you know, extend that reach of where they have to connect to. So So the city of Shelton has done a nice job over the years of building out, a business development, parks. But the fact that we have network all over those parks makes it a little bit easier for somebody coming in saying, hey, where's that connectivity? Because I need to get not only internet access, I also need to get back to my corporate headquarters that might be in Massachusetts or something else like that.
Yeah, so it's kind of become a necessity for the public safety and the education, but for the towns, it can also be a way to help attract new businesses to have that sort of network already in place.
Yes, yes.
I think the barriers still are both the last mile and the building entry costs. But I think there's ways to mitigate that. I mean, I certainly for a developer of a business park, it's to their benefit to bring the fiber into the park or into the buildings, because it's going to help attract tenants to say they have high-speed internet service or high-speed internet service on fiber in those buildings. So that's an area that I think there's tremendous opportunities here in the state yet for communities that have the fiber hanging out on the poles to incent their building owners and businesses to add or bring fiber in.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how it could lead to some towns doing better or worse if they have that benefit. We look at the old factory towns in Connecticut all over the place, and you see the old factories by the river because they had access to the water, to the power from the river. So now it sounds like access to high speed fiber could be one of those things that could allow a town to perhaps thrive or attract new businesses.
Exactly.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
Dale, you're saying that some of the bars to entry is some of the initial costs of getting this going. And one thing that we've been talking a lot about at CCM lately is the American Rescue Plan. How there's this infusion of rescue funds coming in, and even the new infrastructure bill. There's these infusions of cash coming in, but in often cases, they're sort of one-time big infusions. So we formed these committees at CCM with other groups to try to talk about the best ways for municipalities to leverage this, to take this chunk of money and use it once to continue to benefit them in the future. Would fiber and high-speed internet be one of those kind of uses where they could take this kind of windfall, put it into that, and it would continue to pay dividends?
So yes, going back to the Obama stimulus package in 2012, public safety, made a huge investment. We have some contracts that are 20-year IRUs, which means that they're leasing the fiber for us for 20 years. The American Rescue Plan, if I'm not mistaken, the funds have to be spent by 2026. But there are ways where a municipality can lease the fiber on a current state contract, and can you make use of that for 20 years as opposed to buying a circuit from us for the first 4 or 5 years and then saying, okay, well, how do I fund it past 2026? So there's a mechanism where they get an infrastructure in place, connect town buildings, whatever. They might have to augment that with some broadband connectivity, like wireless hotspots, things along those lines. That's something that hopefully CCM can help them out with in terms of advice on the portal. But there is a mechanism where they can make a long-term investment of their infrastructure and get it paid for before 2026.
And so it could be helping out for 20 years going forward. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And we've been doing that with the state since 2002, in both the CEN network as well as in the 911 network.
The challenge with federal funding or any other third-party funding is that it may fund initial construction costs, but too often there's not enough attention paid to the what happens after the initial construction, what happens in the year 2, 3, 4, 5 down the road. what happens when a Hurricane Sandy comes through and destroys a significant number of telephone poles and the infrastructure attached to those poles? Who's going to replace it? And what can you expect in terms of the timeline to replace it? And that's where the risks of building out, for a town to build out its own fiber without having the service providers in place to support that network after the initial build is oftentimes overlooked. And we've seen that across the country where various towns have tried to build out their fiber with the idea of either providing low-cost internet services to their community, whether it's to business or fiber to the home. And they really overlook the difficult to provide or to execute and to support those services down the road.
So support and maintenance after the fact is something they should be thinking about when they're looking at how exactly to proceed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to Dale's point, for example, the contract that we have in place includes maintenance as well, and maintenance can cover a whole bunch of things. It includes that Hurricane Sandy situation, where, if the poles go down, somebody has to fix it. There's a lot to do with just being on the telephone pole. So there's make-ready costs. If I have to move cables back and forth, somebody's responsible for that. There's been a couple of incidents. There's more than a couple of incidents where a town might move their data center, or so a lot of school districts will say, hey, this was the main cog, and now I want to move it to someplace else. And there's a bunch of splicing that needs to be done, which is probably the biggest issue about maintaining a network over time, is to have all the records in place. It's easy to do a 5-node network that will never change, as opposed to something that will be a little bit bigger than that can change over the years, and that is encompassed in the maintenance and or at least the ability to make some changes and have the record keeping in place.
Yeah. Is it a little bit of a random question, but are there any alternatives to fiber out there right now? Is this the only game in town as far as fast internet, or are there other competing technologies going on?
There's, you have the cellular services, the 5G service, but ultimately they connect to fiber at some point. I don't think the computer industry, although it hypes 5G, I don't think that most communities are ready yet to move all of their services into a wireless situation. I mean, there's all sorts of questions of security. There's questions of performance. So that's one. And then, of course, the other is satellite, but nobody's really making any serious efforts in terms of satellite. I know there's attempts now. I don't know who is it. Is it Elon Musk or somebody who's putting these satellites up into orbit? But I think we're a long way yet from that kind of internet service. So to your question, Matt, I think, yeah, fiber is sort of the only game in town.
Kind of since the beginning of the pandemic here, CCM has been trying to tackle the digital divide. Students around the state not only lacked access to proper hardware, just having their own laptop computers in some cases, but also we heard a lot about children having to drive out to the public library to do their homework, in the parking lot, just to kind of get access to the Wi-Fi there. For a lot of families, the cost of high-speed internet could be a burden. Can fiber be made more cost-effective?
So that it is more cost-effective in terms of the higher bandwidth that is out there today. So I know of some providers, and even the cable companies are moving where back in the AOL days, it was very crawling. So there are folks out there that can be delivering, let's say 500 megs of internet for $60 a month, which is, unbelievably greater than it was even, 3 or 4 years ago. The LECs and the cable companies are making their investments. But that still may be a challenge for some folks to pay for. And that's not, Crown's business. Again, like I said, we were the middle mile provider.
Yeah.
The closer that I get to the neighborhoods allows folks to be able to get into the neighborhoods more cost effectively. And that's more of a coverage area. So for example, if I'm 5 miles away, you're not going to get that third party to build out fiber to the home because they got to build the 5 miles. Even if I'm in that neighborhood, if it's 3-acre zoning, it's going to be a tough business model for them to do that price point as well. But that's for the 3-acre zoning. Yeah. In the cities where it's a challenge, it's probably more of a subsidy play than it is anything else. I did see in the infrastructure bill there is some subsidy monies for the lower income folks. I'm not exactly sure, and I think that's has to be done through probably the cities and towns in order to pay for it. Or I'm not sure how that's actually done.
I would add to that too. I don't know if this is appropriate for home use, but has the state considered providing any tax incentives similar to what they do for solar installations to allow businesses, and including small businesses, to pay for that cost of the building entry or the last mile? It's just something I throw out there because we see these tax incentives, whether it's for solar or for energy efficient vehicles. Why not tax incentives to bring the last mile of fiber into your business or maybe even your home?
Kurt, you mentioned the zoning and stuff. So obviously we focus on municipal government, but a lot of what we do is kind of speaking on their behalf at the legislature. Are there some legislative changes or solutions that you see as potentially helpful to expanding access to fiber in the state? Like, are there things that could be changed as far as the zoning or the regulations or, like I said, tax incentives that you see as something that would be useful to do legislatively?
I'll say, in the northwest side of the state, where, they're spread out further. It's probably more, and I've seen this up in Massachusetts, where the state has actually thrown money out for, a county, city, town, so that they can build out an infrastructure, who's going to build it out, to be more robust. I mean, obviously the current providers can do that, but the question becomes to them, is it worth that investment versus someplace else? I mean, otherwise, you can do it, let's say, out in that corner of the state, but instead of paying $60, it might be $160.
So some subsidies, some tax breaks might help get the broadband out into some of the smaller towns quicker if the state kind of stepped in and helped them with that.
Yes. Yep.
Along kind of the lines we were talking about before about families and affordability, some towns across the country have begun to offer free internet in certain parts of town, generally, the parks, downtown areas. Here I am in New Haven, they have free internet on the green. Does a robust fiber network make doing that easier?
Typically, yes, it would. I think I even know who probably provides that in New Haven as well. So again, same thing. If there's a robust fiber network, you still have to, in the case of New Haven Green, they still have to get from the New Haven Green back to a POP in order for that internet to come. So the fact that there is a fiber footprint there allows them to instead of over time scale that internet from 1 gig to 10 gig, and whoever is in that park can then share that, whether it's via the phones or whatever. The better the infrastructure is, that third party company who's going to providing wireless access, which is usually a wireless ISP, just needs that infrastructure so they can layer back to a POP.
I would add to that, Matt, not only Wi-Fi access points, but we're seeing a tremendous growth in security cameras. And in many cases, we've had school systems come to us and say, we would like to make our cameras available to the police department, or vice versa. The police department wants access to the cameras in the school. And it's possible to do that traversing the Connecticut Education Network and the Public Safety Data Network. And it's possible to do that with very high degree of security, so that you prevent people that are not authorized to access those cameras from accessing them. So and I know that right now there's an initiative in New Haven to put or add quite a number of security cameras around the city. So how they're going to connect those back to a central network operations center, I'm not sure yet, but certainly fiber is the preferred medium to do that.
Dale, if I'm not mistaken, you guys did a pretty robust project down in Norwalk, near the park where they always have the festival.
Yeah, the Norwalk Oyster Festival.
Yes.
We recently added cameras all the way out to the beach. We jokingly refer it to the hot dog stand out there. Has great internet service, but their intent is to use it to provide Wi-Fi access out at the beach, as well as to carry that security camera traffic back to the police department. So yeah, they've got high-speed fiber to the beach.
Sounds pretty good to me. One thing we always like to talk about at the end, we talked about kind of the history and where we are now, but always like to kind of look at the future. Specifically for local government, what do you see coming? What's here now that's going to grow in importance, and what do you see coming in the not too distant future that is going to be important to local government in the technology?
Well, security, cybersecurity, is on everybody's mind, and that goes hand in hand with your sister organization, KERMA. We've received numerous calls just in the past few weeks about the insurance or lack of cyber insurance, because a lot of these carriers are canceling the policies because they're basically they're losing their shirts, so to speak, on cyber risk. So I think further investments in protecting the networks, protecting the databases, and that includes in the cloud as well. At this point, many towns and cities have already moved things like financial systems and public works applications. They've already moved them to their cloud provider. So it's important that they also provide that cybersecurity in the cloud too, because every day we pick up the paper and read about some company that has been hacked and now has exposed thousands or hundreds of thousands of personal information to the hackers. So that's an area where municipalities really need to sort of beef up their investment in protecting their networks. And having a robust fiber network in place also allows you to keep it private, and that sort of gets back to some of the issues that we do in terms of securing the routing traffic on the networks. As for what municipalities are going to use these networks in the future, the sky's unlimited. I mean, we've heard all sorts of wild stories. Smart roads, smart buildings, smart this, smart that. I mean,
all sorts of stuff we wouldn't have predicted a couple years ago that's in place now. Yeah. We're talking here on Zoom, and people are having meetings there. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, who knows where it's going to go? Kurt, what do you see coming down?
Well, I mean, there are definitely some smart city initiatives which are probably a bit out further. But for example, if you've, I know one of the things that we're going to be talking about later on is micro trenching, and maybe doing some things where I saw a project down in Mount Vernon, if I'm not mistaken, that they were talking about like heating this, the for light pole poles and things along those lines, and it's in the future, but you do need an infrastructure to make that work. I think the security cameras is a big thing, more closer, and I believe if the cities can offer some more robust wireless ISP initiatives for folks at least near their buildings, so that they can at least give some additional folks access to high-speed internet.
Well, I guess we will find out in the years to come which of these predictions come out, and I'm sure there'll be all sorts of stuff that none of us here will have thought of until we see it. But it's an exciting field to be in, guys, an exciting time to be in it, I would think. There's, if anything, more and more demand every day for what you guys do in local government.
Like drinking from a fire hose.
We'd like to thank our guests, Kurt Fox of Crown Castle and Dale Bruckhardt of Digital Back Office. We'd like to thank our premier sponsors, Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks, who you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com and paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.